near the beginning of the questioning of Kelly Jensen, I objected to a question as leading. The court sustained the objection, at which point Ms. Gabrielle turned to Mr. Jamboys in a voice that I could hear over here, and the record should reflect that I would say there are two or three jurors within the same distance as me away from Ms. Gabrielle, but she turned to Mr. Jamboys and said, taking the fifth doesn't do it. I presume in suggesting that would make Mrs. Jensen a hostile witness. My concern being to be throwing things around like that the witness has taken a privilege is at the very least reckless. And I don't know what we do about these kind of things, because she's saying it in a voice that could be heard by jurors, and she's talking about the fifth, and I mean that. So I have a concern that jurors may have heard her say something about Mrs. Jensen taking the fifth, and I objected to it. I asked for a sidebar to make sure that nothing like that would happen again. But I have concerns about that, and I don't know if the jurors heard it. But they're the same distance as I am away, and I easily heard it. Now she was turned towards me, but I don't know if the court has any suggestions, but I'm worried that jurors may have heard that.
Is there a response for the state?
Yes, Your Honor. Since I was a witness to that, Ms. Gabrielle was speaking to me, and I would point out that, and you can, and the record, I guess, should show this. When she's turned toward me, her back is to the jury, and my microphone was turned off. And it was a very quiet whisper. Now, perhaps Mr. Albee was able to hear it, but her back was to the jury. And Ms. Gabrielle was conferring with me at the time, and she apparently didn't agree with you. It was apparent to me she did not agree with your ruling, and she said, oh, taking the fifth doesn't do it? Thereby, she seemed to believe that since this witness had taken the fifth outside the presence of the jury, that made her an adverse witness. Then there was a sidebar, and on the way back from the sidebar, and you had said, no, that taking the fifth doesn't do it, I'd indicated to her that in my estimation, taking the fifth didn't do it either, and that we should not treat her as a hostile. It's one of the few times, you know, every once in a while I'll get it right. And so that, there was, I don't think even counsel is suggesting that Ms. Gabrielle intentionally would have done anything wrong, but I think he's suggesting, well, we've got to be careful about how we communicate with each other. And when she was speaking to me, it was in a whisper. It was not a stage whisper. It was directed at me. It wasn't really directed at Mr. Albee. It certainly wasn't directed at the jury, and her back was to the jury. There's virtually no possibility that even the juror with the best possible hearing could have possibly have heard that communication. And we understand that when we're communicating with each other, I mean, my wife has been telling me that, you know, they can hear you on the television because your mic's on, and you'll notice that sometimes I reach like this to cover up the mic, and I try to remember to do that, and we're conscious of that. And I know that I'd spoken with Assistant Attorney General Tom Fallon, who prosecuted the Avery case, and he said that's one of the problems that you've got when you've got these mobile mics, is that the television audience can hear. Well, this jury's not watching television anyway, and we have been mindful of that. We're trying to do that, and we're trying to consult with each other in such a way that the jury can't hear us, and I don't believe the jury heard what Ms. Gabrielle said.
Well, yeah.
There's a microphone right in between them. I don't know if I hear the whisper of the microphone. I'd also note that I was speaking with Attorney Pat Cafferty during the break, who's seated in the front row directly behind the prosecutors, and he indicated that he had heard the same thing. So at least in two directions, people could hear what was said. And no, I'm not saying it was intentional. I don't believe it was. But what are we going to do when jurors hear this stuff?
All right, now here, starting point. Just to make the record complete. I'm going to say 20 feet away. and I would be at a right angle to Ms. Gabrielle when she's facing Mr. Jamboy, I did not hear it. You are correct that there are jurors, three of whom are probably closer than you are, and certainly are closer than I am well, the closest is probably only about maybe 8 feet away. But Mr. Jamboy correctly states that the jurors, Ms. Gabrielle's back would have been to them at the time that the statement was made. Mr. Cafferty is at a right angle also and is about, I'm going to say, 5 to 6 feet away. And it didn't get picked up on the microphone, I'm quite sure, because I didn't hear it. And I didn't hear it without aid of the microphone. So it doesn't, it frankly would surprise, although not stun me, if a juror heard it. That's number one. Number two, caution would be advised in respect to this. And number three, you've brought the subject up, but you've not suggested that anything be done about it. So I'll leave it with an admonition since I've not been asked to do anything else.
For mistrial right now.
You really want a mistrial?
Yeah. I don't know what jurors heard.
Do you want a mistrial?
Sure.
Well, I'm not going to, I don't think there's sufficient cause, but there is a difficulty when excessive motions for mistrial are made because at some point it could become a real situation, and that is a two-way street. But I'll say nothing more. There's not sufficient cause for a mistrial at this point. Anything else?
No, Judge.
Okay, let's proceed.
I can't remember, Mrs. Jensen, if we concluded this email, but it concludes with your response to Mr. Jensen, how was lunch? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. The next email is States Exhibit 54, which begins October 8th, 1998, subject 430. From you to Mr. Jensen, where you say, I'm out of here, talk to you later, IDLY. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then Mr. Jensen responds to your email October 8th, 1998 at 11:17 p.m. Correct?
Yes.
And he responds, just sitting here drinking wine, thinking about this time last week. No issues, just great. Missing something. IMY, a new one. IMY, IWY, IDLY. Thinking about the last line in your note. Feelings the same. If you can't remember, ask. Kinda wondering how to put the crap in the office to bed. There's enough stuff being bounced around that should be able to find out where it actually originates. Suspect it's Mary. She's out tomorrow, so can talk to Rose, Midge, and Barry. If that proves to be the case, she'll have a bad day Monday. This, in quotes, is all tough enough without this stuff. Patience, time, and let it play out. IDLY. Correct?
Yes.
And on October 8th, 1998, is he referring to the weekend that you spent together the weekend prior to October 8th, 1998?
I would assume so. That's what it said in the email.
And do you recall if that's the weekend in Appleton or if it was somewhere else?
I don't know.
And what does IMY mean?
I miss you.
And IWY?
I want you.
And do you remember what the last line of your note was?
No.
And when he wonders how to put the crap in the office to bed, is he referring to the gossip that he's having an affair with you?
I assume so, yes.
And that was the gossip in his office in Racine?
Yes.
And then he says, this, in quotes, is all tough enough without this stuff. By this, is he referring to your relationship?
Yes.
And that it's tough enough being apart and having spouses so that you can't be together? Is that what's tough enough?
I don't know.
But he's asking you to have patience?
No, I think he's just stating that patience and time and let it all play out, just kind of throwing it out there.
In terms of getting your relationship as a more permanent one?
Just to kind of see what happens.
Okay, to see what happens.
I don't know. To
Your
see
relationship.
if our relationships with others, with us, I don't know.
So he might be referring to your relationship with others in
He
this
might.
last line?
He might be.
But that's not what you think it is, correct?
Objection, argumentative.
Just vague. I'm not sure.
Well, by this, he's talking about your relationship with him, correct?
I would assume so, yes.
Okay. And then he says patience, time, and let it play out. IDLY, I do love you.
Okay.
Okay? So he's asking you to have patience and let it all play out to see how far your relationship can go, correct?
Objection, argumentative, leading.
Overruled.
I don't know if he's asking me to have patience or if he's just making the comment that he's going to have patience and time and then he'll let it all play out. I don't know that there was, whether he was talking about himself or to me.
But it definitely relates to your relationship together.
Yes.
And then you respond the next morning at 6:35 a.m., correct? Or what appears to be 6:35 a.m.?
It wouldn't be 6:35 a.m.
What time do you think it would be?
It would be sometime after 8 o'clock.
Okay. So he emailed you at 11:17 p.m. the night before, and you responded the next morning?
I guess. That's how it looks on the paper.
Okay. You don't have a specific recollection of that particular email exchange?
No.
But you say to him, just don't make too big a deal out of Mary's jabbering. Kind of crabby today. Slept okay, but tired of not being able to do it in a bed. Couldn't you just see me pregnant and sleeping on the couch? What a friendly person I would be for all those months. Paren, not, exclamation point, close paren. Last night went about as I expected. Even without kids, marriage can be dull and predictable. He knows I'm in a mood, but since I won't talk to him, he just keeps his distance. Truth is, I don't know what to tell him. I feel like I just want some time to myself without him around getting in my space. And then there's, quote, this, close quote. By this, you're referring to your affair with Mr. Jensen?
Yes.
And in this email, you're talking about your husband
Yes.
and how he knows you're in a mood, but you won't talk to him?
Right. Yes.
And you don't know what to tell him about why you're acting the way you're acting?
Right.
And you're acting differently because you're having an affair with Mr. Jensen.
Leading.
Overruled.
Probably so, yes.
And he has no idea what's going on?
Correct.
And are you sleeping on the couch at this time?
Only when I wake up and he's snoring so loud I can't sleep in the bedroom.
So then Mr. Jensen responds now Friday morning, we'll keep it lighthearted, was thinking, we're just friends, right? So all this stuff she's making up and suspecting is out of line. And it was also Barry's comment about you being in the knee hole of my desk to Scott. Just time to shut them down, especially Mary. If she's going to be my, is that assistant, ASST?
Yes.
Won't put up with that crap from her. Expect some discretion. If she has something to say, she should say it to me, only then shut up. I'm pretty cranky today too. Thought I'd go to bed early and see what happens, so watched ER in bed. Nothing there, so got up and spent some quality time with my charts, etc. Preg and on the couch. Pretty picture. Oh, did you ever locate them? What do you think you'd like to tell him? Does this enter into it? Was I am why last night, and sure it will be the same tonight. Obsession. That was his response to you?
Yes.
And is he talking when he says it was also Barry's comment about you being in the knee hole of my desk to Scott? Was that a comment that Barry Peterson had made to Scott, everyone's boss, that you were under Mr. Jensen's desk performing oral sex?
I don't know what the reference was exactly.
Well, he's talking about the gossip in his office, correct?
Yes.
The gossip about your affair?
Yes.
And for you to be in the knee hole of his desk, it would be for oral sex.
Objection argumentative.
If that's what that term means, yes, I'm not familiar with that term.
The knee hole, you
Yeah.
mean? The opening where you put your knees under a desk? Does that help you remember what this is about?
Again, Judge, she's being asked to interpret what somebody else says about what some other people said.
I don't know specifically what that meant. I don't know if it was a sexual connotation or if he just meant I was hiding under the desk. I don't know.
And then he indicates that he expects some discretion from Mary, his assistant, correct?
Yes.
And he also says that we're just friends, right? Correct?
Yes.
But on October 9th of 1998, you weren't just friends, were you?
No.
You were having sexual intercourse and oral intercourse and communicating daily with each other, correct?
Correct.
So he expects Mary to cover for him?
I don't know if that's what he's trying to say.
Well, he says, especially Mary, if she's going to be my assistant, won't put up with that crap from her, expect some discretion. If she has something to say, she should say it to me only, then shut up.
Judge, I object. It's not for this witness to interpret those words. They are what they are.
Well, Mrs. Jensen, at the time that you were...
Just a
I'm
moment.
sorry.
Are you withdrawing the question?
No?
The objection is, excuse me, she can answer if she knows.
Okay. Would you like to tell me the question again?
Sure. Could you please read it back?
Question, well, he says especially Mary, if she's going to be my assistant, won't put up with that crap from her, would expect some discretion. If she has something to say, she should say it to me only, then shut up.
And so he's telling you that he expects Mary, his assistant, to cover for his affair with you, correct?
No, he expects discretion. I would read it as he expected her not to talk about it. And if that's considered covering, I don't know.
Would you consider it covering?
Objection, relevant.
Sustained.
And Judge, I renew my 90403 objections.
Overruled.
So what you understood from this email is that Mr. Jensen expected Mary, his assistant, to keep quiet about your affair or his affair with you, correct?
Well, just not to talk about it with everybody else if that's what she knew.
And Mary is who? Meredith Schultz
Yes.
or Meredith Perez?
I only know Schultz.
And then you respond, "What the F have I done?" Exclamation points. So did you learn anything with your charts last night? Mark came home last night with 3 beers in him, ate dinner, grabbed his book, sat on the couch with me, read, fell asleep. So I turned off the TV and we went to bed. No chasing. Just asked me if I was interested in getting any. And now I've been informed that he isn't playing golf with Sully this weekend and I have him all to myself the entire, in caps, weekend. This should sound nice, but for some reason, Of course, this enters into it to some degree, but mostly the funkiness of it all is starting to wear on me. Call me soon so we can speak. That was your response?
Yes.
And by this response, you're saying your husband, Mr. Greenman's weekend away was canceled?
Yes.
And that instead he'd be spending the weekend with you?
Yes.
And you're not happy about that?
Yes.
And when you say, of course, this enters into it to some degree, you're referring to your relationship with Mr. Jensen?
Yes.
And mostly the funkiness of it all is starting to wear on me. What are you referring to there?
I'm not sure.
And then Mr. Jensen responds at 11:24 a.m. on Friday, October 9th, 1998. What the F have I done? What is this? Looked at some nice rounded bottoms with the charts. That was his response?
Yes.
And then you respond, I need a serious attitude adjustment. 3,000 lashes would help, but might not be enough today. Operations just pulled a stunt that possibly has me looking like a liar to the Rockford office. Needless to say, not very happy about it. And Kathy Fassel just got an earful on her voicemail. No tolerance today. That's your response?
Yes.
What do you mean by no tolerance today?
Oh, just that I wasn't going to have a lot of patience with the people that I worked with as far as mistakes.
In that term, no tolerance today, is that a phrase that at the time that you knew Mr. Jensen in 1998 that you used often?
I have no idea.
Well, do you often interchange tolerance with patience?
I don't know.
Did you at the time?
I don't know.
And then he responds that same day, how about an X and O, a nice dinner, a couple of glasses of wine, curl up, watch a movie, and 6,000. That was his response?
Yes.
And by an X and an O, is he offering you a hug and a kiss?
Yes.
And he's offering you a nice dinner?
He's suggesting it, yes.
And a couple of glasses, he's offering you a couple of glasses of wine?
Well, he's not going to run down and give it to me, but yes.
Well, I didn't ask you if he was going to run down and give it to you. I asked
I don't
you-
think he's offering. I think he's just, I think he's just suggesting it. I don't know that he's offering anything.
And the 6,000, that refers to the 6,000 lashes?
Yes.
And is that a sexual connotation?
Yes.
And you reply, how wonderful. What time should I come over? Yeah, right. Correct?
Yes.
And that's because you're in St. Louis and he's in Racine, correct?
Correct.
And he responds, if only. And you respond, no sh ... or dash. Life would be so cool, and I wouldn't be! Exclamation points, and then the cunnilingus symbol, correct?
Yeah.
And when he says life would be so cool and he wouldn't be, meaning he'd be hot because of your the ability to have sexual contact on more regularly?
That's my email to him, so that would be me saying.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So that would be your reference to having the ability to have sexual contact with him on a regular basis?
Yes.
And again, he responds by time, patience, and figure it out. Way too cool, and I think I could warm you up, correct?
Yes.
So in this email, he's telling you that with some patience, he can figure out a way for the two of you to be together?
I don't know. I think it's just time, patience, and figured out for a time to get together, but not necessarily be together. Well, yeah, yes, be together, yes.
And then you respond, my point exactly, correct?
Yes.
And that's in reference to his, I think I could warm you up statement?
Yes.
Because you're saying, what you meant by this is that you know that he could keep you sexually satisfied and active if you were together?
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
Well, what does that mean? When you said my point exactly, what were you referring to?
Just that I would enjoy being with him.
Sexually or otherwise? Or
Otherwise, both.
Thank you.
In addition to 90403, I'd renew my previous due process objections.
Overruled.
States Exhibits S53, which is an email dated October 8th. Oh. This is a duplicate of S54, the first part of S54, so I'll pull that one out. States Exhibit 161, which is an email dated October 11th, 1998. This is an email from Mr. Jensen to you, Ms. Jensen,
Yes.
and it's dated October 11th, 1998 at 8:36 p.m.
Yes.
And he's saying, good morning, so how was the rest of the weekend? Hoping you're okay.
Yes.
And do you recall whether October 11th, 1998 was a Sunday night or Sunday?
I don't.
States Exhibit 145, which is dated October, it starts out October 9th, 1998 at 8:14 a.m. And this is an email from you to Mr. Jensen. And does it appear to be the same email that we read regarding your contact with your husband the night before October 9th, 1998, where he says his weekend he'll be home all weekend with you instead of golfing?
Yes.
And then Mr. Jensen responds to this email October 11th, 1998 at 11:51 p.m.
Yes.
And this is a different response from, well, I withdraw that. He writes, so did his whole weekend get ruined? Poor guy. It's not you, it's the funky. Hope he came back with a newfound attitude. A whole weekend would be too good to be true. Can't wait to see what's in your trunk. Remind me to tell you about the story with Dave and Sat. Kept the phone with me all day today just in case. If it worked, I'll be calling as soon as I get a chance. Hoping you're okay. I know you're all right no matter. That sucks, but hoping you're really okay. 12, time to hit the rack, almost literally. Sweet dreams. That's his response?
Yeah.
And when he says 12, time to hit the rack, is he referring that it's midnight and he needs to get to bed?
Yes.
And so he's writing this email from home?
Objection, calls for speculation.
If she knows, she can answer.
I don't know.
It appears that way though, right?
Objection, leading. An argument.
Well, it's without more foundation, it sounds like it would be speculative.
Well, Mrs. Jensen, did your husband at the time of October 11th, 1998 have a bed in his office at Stiefel, Nicholas, and Racine?
Not to my knowledge.
So time to hit the rack would refer to his bed at home?
Objection, still calls for speculation.
That would be argumentative, speculative.
Well, at the time that you read this email, Mrs. Jensen, you had an understanding of what it meant when he said time to hit the rack.
Judge, this is all argumentative, and the court's already found it to be speculative. She's answered the question.
Sustained.
He wrote that, remind me to tell you a story about the story with Dave and Sat. Do you know who he's referring to by Dave?
No, it could be a couple of people.
And then he tells you to have sweet dreams?
Yes.
The next exhibit is State's Exhibit 56, dated October 11th, 1998, 11:10 p.m. In this email is from Mark Jensen to naringd@stiefel.com, exnerd@stiefel.com, petersonb@stiefel.com, and jensenm@stiefel.com. Subject: Kramer's rewrite of his Broken Field running piece. And as good as an explanation as any for the intraday 10% moves. Tail wagging the dog, and the tail is the Hedgies and LTC. Maybe something to talk to clients about. Cheers. Now, Mr. Jensen also forwarded this same email to you then? Do you see that, Mrs. Jensen?
Yes.
And the forward to you occurs Monday, October 12th, 1998 at 1:19 a.m.
Okay, yes, I see that.
And was Mr. Jensen forwarding to you an article from www.thestreet.com?
That's what it looks like, yes.
And were you aware at that time that www.thestreet.com was a financial type of news group?
Objection, characterization of news group.
I'll rephrase. Were you aware at that time what www.thestreet.com was?
I don't think so. I don't recall, no.
But it appears, from your understanding, it contained an article regarding stocks and the market moves and 10% moves and intraday, correct?
Objection to its leading.
Sustained.
I'm sorry, was it sustained?
Yes.
Well, you received this email with this article, correct? Is that true?
Yes, it would appear so.
Okay. And do you recall what the article was about that Mr. Jensen forwarded to you?
No.
Did it appear to have something to do with work?
Also speculation. Overruled.
I would only assume that based on what he said in the comments below.
And then you respond the next morning. Well, actually, let's go back. This email that he forwarded to you was from mjensen@execpc.com. Is that correct?
Yes.
So was it your understanding that Mr. Jensen had a home email account in addition to his Stiefel Nicholas email account?
Yes.
And did he at times email you from this home account?
Yes, it looks like it. He did, yes.
And this wasn't the first time that he emailed you from his home account, was it?
I don't remember.
But you do recall getting other emails from mjensen@execpc.com?
Yes.
And that's in the fall of 1998?
Yes.
And then you reply to Mark Jensen, have you ever noticed that Dan's email address is xnerd? Thought that was amusing. I am Y2. Correct?
Yes.
And then you reply again before he replies on Monday, October 12th, saying, replied back to your home address. Correct?
Yes.
And then he replies, you're right. I like that. Thanks. IWI. Correct?
Yes.
And when he says you're right, I like that, is he referring to the fact that Dan's email address is xnerd?
I would assume so, yes.
And he has nothing to say about the fact that you replied back to his home address?
I don't know.
Well, then you reply, me too, correct?
Yes.
So you pointed out to him that you replied back to your home address, and he does not refer to that comment at all in the rest of this email that you see, correct?
I don't know, I guess. I'm not sure.
Well, do you see it?
Objection, argumentative, there's no claim that these are all the emails, it's,
I asked about this email.
I don't know if he's referring to the home address or if he's referring to Dan's email. I just don't know. It's been 9 years. I have no idea.
I didn't understand your answer. Could you say that again?
I don't know.
You don't know whether this...
I don't know which one he's referring to. I don't know if he's referring to the Dan Exner or if he's referring that I replied back to his home address. I don't know.
Well, replied back to your home address. You're right. I like that. You're suggesting that you're right, I like that, might refer to the fact that you replied back to his home email address?
It might.
And it has nothing, you're suggesting that it might have nothing to do with Dan's email address being ex-nerd?
objection, leaving her misstates what her testimony was, she didn't suggest it had nothing to do with that, she said she didn't know.
She stated she didn't know.
And then you reply, me too, correct?
Yes.
And is that in reference to his IWY, I want you?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
And then he responds, Monday, October 12th at 12:45 p.m., you like it or I am why? And you respond, actually it was IWY, not MY, correct?
Yes.
So you were reminding him that you said, I want you, not I miss you?
I think he said it and I said me too.
And then he replies, hey, all three apply. IMY, IWY, IDLY, correct?
Yes.
So he misses you, he wants you, and he does love you.
Yes.
And then you reply, well, okay, I suppose you're right about that. Could really use a face-to-face today. IMY pretty a lot right now. Could use a X and O or two. That's your response?
Yes.
And what you're saying is that you would like to see him today on
Yes.
October 12th?
Yes.
And that you miss him a lot right now?
Yes.
And that you would like a hug and a kiss or two?
Yes.
And then he responds, XO, XO, XO. Doesn't quite work. That's what I meant about the computer. Would be nice, but it sucks at the same time. Being there and not being there. That's his response?
Yes.
And then you reply, yeah, but it's better than wanting to be able to talk to you and not being able to, don't you think? Is that your response?
Yes.
And are you referring to the fact that at least you can communicate by email when you're not together?
Yes.
And then he replies, if it saved wondering for 2 days, yes. And you reply, I've got to stop doing that to you, and you need to learn I'll be fine. If it's really bad, parent, and sometimes just kind of bad, close parent, you'll get a call. Trust me, in all caps and exclamation points. But thanks so very much for caring. That's your response?
I can't see it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, that's my response.
And when you say, if it's really bad, you'll get a call, trust me, are you referring to the problems you were having in your marriage?
I assume so, yes.
State's Exhibit 62, an email dated October 15th, 1998 at 10:26 a.m. And this is an email from Mark Jensen to you, where the subject is last night, and he asks, how did things go with Missy? Correct?
Yes.
And who's Missy?
She was a lady that I worked with.
And obviously, well, strike that. Was Mark aware that you worked with Missy?
Yes.
And you had other conversations with him about Missy?
Not that I remember specifically, but probably.
Okay. And you reply, we had a nice time, went to dinner, Italian, showed her the pictures and just talked about her surgery and blueprint. I was home before 8, as you know, and spent the night on the couch watching TV thinking about computers and boyfriends. The old man spent the evening on the love seat doing work stuff and reading. Pretty low key. I was exhausted. Went to bed at 10, fell asleep fast again, and didn't wake up this time until 2:45, and no alcohol was involved. Yippee. That's your response?
Yes.
And when you're thinking about computers and boyfriends, were you thinking about Mr. Jensen?
Yes.
And when you refer to the old man who spent the evening on the love seat, are you referring to your husband?
Yes.
And then he replies, computers and boyfriends, question mark. And you reply, yep, correct?
Yes.
And then he replies, and care to elaborate? And you reply, well, I was bored watching TV and Mark wasn't talking and I wanted to talk to you. That's all. Correct?
Yes.
And he says basically ditto. Correct?
Yes.
So he's saying that he wanted to talk to you last night also?
Yes.
And then you reply, so here we are. I am why, can't wait. Is that correct?
Yes.
And he replies that same day, big time, IDLY, meaning I love you. Correct?
Yes.
And is it that you can't wait for an upcoming trip where you'll see each other?
I assume so, yes.
This is State's Exhibit 59, an email exchange that commences October 12th, 1998. So actually, this is out of order, Mrs. Jensen. The last email was from October 15th, 1998. This is October 12th, 1998. And it's an email to you from slacker@pgh.net, correct?
Yes.
And at this point on October 12th, 1998, your email address is still labontek@stiefel.com?
Looks like it, yes.
Although your name had changed to Greenman
Yes.
because of your marriage in September, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And this is an email from an ex-boyfriend
Yes.
where he says, Kelly, how's it going? Okay, here. Hey, I just have one question. I seem to be having the same problem over and over with the opposite sex. They think I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, then all of a sudden I'm not worth dog crap. So since you were the first one it happened with, I'm asking for you to tell me what changed your mind all of a sudden. Don't hold back, just tell me straight up. I figure if I can get some feedback, maybe I won't keep repeating the same mistakes. I still think you and I were meant for each other, but that's another story altogether, isn't it? Well, hope things are going well for you. I don't mean to keep bugging you, but I still think of you as a friend friend. Wish you could get to that point with me. Thanks for the memories, Tracy. And then you forward that email from the ex-boyfriend to Mr. Jensen,
Yes.
and you tell Mr. Jensen that love notes from my psycho in Pittsburgh. He tricked me by changing his email name. See, everybody wants to be my friend, even when I dump them like, quote, dog crap, close quote. What a day. And he responds, nice name, slacker, should be stalker. Did you respond? Is that correct?
Yes.
And you respond to nope in all caps and exclamation points. I haven't responded to this guy in over a year, yet he still persists. Unbelievable. Multiple exclamation points, correct?
Yes.
And then he replies, I can kind of understand, in a way, that gorgeous thing that got away, even if he is a psycho, correct?
Yes.
And by that gorgeous thing that got away, he's referring to you?
Yes.
And you reply, if she had told you you were insecure and a whiny, manipulative baby, would you pursue? And he replies, think not, correct?
Yes.
And then you reply, okay, bored with talking about Psycho Man, on to bigger and better things. How's yours? That's your response?
Yes.
And does that exchange contain sexual innuendo referring to his penis?
No, it's just a comment.
It's just a comment, bigger
Yeah,
and...
like, how's your day? How's your life? What's going on?
So by
It's just a
bigger and
comment.
better things, how's yours? You're not referring to his penis?
No. Not that I remember.
And then he replies, my what? ... And you reply, just testing to see what your answer would be. Nothing in particular, but my mind can go just about anywhere and usually does. Is that your response?
Yes.
And so does that help refresh your memory as to whether by bigger and better things you're talking about his penis?
No.
It does not?
No,
Refresh your-
I just don't think I was. I just think I was just asking him what was going on and just presented it in a way that gave it a sexual connotation.
Okay. And then he responds, wasn't sure if you meant that or my psycho women. It's lonely and neglected, nothing you can't fix. So was that his answer?
Yes.
And by it's lonely and neglected, nothing you can't fix, is he now referring to his penis?
Yes.
And then you reply, how is she? Didn't you get to play, quote, hide the salami this weekend? And he responds, hide the salami. Actually did that Friday night. She was sore and walking funny this weekend. Didn't want any more. That was his response?
Yes.
And by how is she, didn't you get to play hide the salami this weekend? Are you referring to his wife?
Yes.
Mrs. Jensen?
Yes.
Mrs. Julie Jensen?
Yes.
And by hide the salami, are you asking him whether he had sexual intercourse with his wife?
Yes.
And he's telling you that he actually did have sexual intercourse with his wife Friday night?
Yes.
And this is October 12th, 1998 that he's telling you this?
Yes.
And then you reply, would you do her to get her to walk funny, correct?
Yes.
And he replies, other than the obvious, there wasn't a Boy Scout issue, correct?
Yes.
So he's indicating that he didn't have a problem with his penis?
Yes.
Or performing sexually?
Yes.
And then you reply, does she always walk funny after you're done with her? Is that correct?
Yes.
And he responds, I guess at least she knows she's been done. That's his response?
Yes.
And you respond, maybe it's just me, but I never realized that was so hard on women. I know when I've been done, paren usually, close paren, but it certainly doesn't put me out of commission, paren, at least not after the first couple of hours, exclamation points, close paren, correct?
Yes.
And when you say I know when I've been done, you're referring to sexual intercourse?
Yes.
And was it your understanding that he was making fun of his wife's stamina for sexual intercourse?
No, I didn't take it as making fun. No, I just took it as just what it was.
And what was it?
Just a comment about what had happened.
And then he replies, you recover rather quickly, huh? And you reply, I'm resilient and usually ready for more. Parent, not that I ever get it. Close parent, problem with that? Was that your response?
Yes.
And he says, hell no, I'll try to fix that. Correct?
Yes.
And by fixing that, he means that you're usually ready for more, but you don't get it at home?
Yes.
And that refers to sexual intercourse?
Yes.
And then you reply, we'd have to be in the same room, not to mention the same town or even state to accomplish that. But thanks for the thought. Correct?
Yes.
And then he replies, well, technically, it was more than the thought I was thinking about. That's his response?
Yes.
And you respond the 23rd, and he responds, and the 24th, but who's counting? Correct?
I don't see it all.
Oh, I'm sorry. There you go.
Yes.
And by the 23rd and the 24th, are you referring to your plans to meet in Chicago
Yes, I believe so.
on October 23rd and October 24th of 1998?
Yes.
And then you reply, how did things go with Mary? Correct? You see
Yes.
that? Okay. States Exhibit 57 begins with an email exchange Monday, October 12th, 1998, 11:56 a.m.
Judge, 90402, 90403, due process.
Overruled, overruled, overruled.
And this is an email from you to Mr. Jensen, dated October 12th, where the subject is Chicago. Oak Brook will move on October 23rd and open for business October 26th. This line came from Crystal in an email from last week's meeting, which I didn't attend. How perfect is that? Where is Oak Brook in relation to the airport? Any ideas? Is that correct?
Yes.
And by Oak Brook, you're referring to, what are you referring to?
Another branch that the company was opening.
And Mr. Jensen responds, right next door, somebody's taking care of us. Ideas? Yeah, a lot of ideas. That's his response?
Yes.
And did this email exchange precede your plans to meet in Chicago?
I don't know.
Were you and Mr. Jensen planning on using the opening of the Oak Brook office near Chicago as an excuse to get away from your spouses and families and get together?
Yes.
And then you reply, really, oh, this is so cool. I'm definitely psyched now. Man, I can't wait to go. Correct?
Yes.
And then he replies, or come as the case may be. Did you smile? That's his response?
Yes.
And by or come as the case may be, he's referring to having sexual intercourse with you on this trip to Chicago?
Yes.
And then you reply, You know, you certainly don't help my state of mind at work. Of course I smiled right after I slowed my breathing. That was your answer?
Yes.
And then he replies, 3,000 lashes, think about it. That's correct?
Yes.
And by 3,000 lashes, what is he referring to?
It's nothing, just a sexual connotation.
Okay. And then you reply, you're an evil man, Jensen, to the core. And then it appears there's a J after that. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then he replies, okay, 6,000, or maybe you'd not be wanting them. And then you reply, let's see, blue, silk, shorter than a cocktail dress, and not planning on keeping it on long. What the hell do you think? Correct?
Yes.
And then he replies, I guess you'd be wanting them then. Just don't be letting me stop when things are getting, well, GGOD. Is that his response to you?
Yes.
And by GGOD, is he meaning good?
Yeah. Yes.
So he doesn't want you to stop him when things are getting good?
Yes.
And then you reply, why would you even think I would do such a horrible thing as that? Correct?
Yes.
States Exhibit 58, email dated October 12th, 1998, beginning 12:57 p.m. Ms. Jensen, this starts with an email from Mark Jensen to you, where the subject is Patagonia online store. Do you see that?
Yes.
And there's http www.patagonia.com/products/products.ehtml. The file Patagonia online store. The shelled version does come in a dark green. I'd rather be keeping those guys warm, but, and then there's another link to patagonia.com. You see that?
Yes.
And was Mr. Jensen forwarding you a link to patagonia.com with women's clothing
Yes.
displayed?
Yes.
And then you reply, do you look at women's clothes all the time or just on occasion? That's your reply?
Yes.
And then Mr. Jensen replies, I guess just kind of browse at times to see if anything catches my eye, especially when thinking about somebody. Sometimes specifically go looking for something. That's his response?
Yes.
And so he's suggesting that he looks at women's clothes when he's thinking about you being the somebody?
Yes.
And you reply, what am I supposed to do with you? Correct?
Yes.
And he replies, can think of a couple of different things, correct?
Yes.
And you reply, care to elaborate? Correct? Can you see that one?
Yes.
This is States Exhibit S-160. Where the subject is quotes dated Thursday, October 15th, 1998. Oh, Ms. Jensen.
The clerk advises this one has not been admitted yet.
I think it was offered earlier as a different.
169, did you say?
160.
Any objection to the offer?
Well, I remember my objections on 90402, 90403, and due process grounds asked for a continuing objection to the emails, but I don't object to this particular one being received.
It'll be received.
And I think your objections are overruled.
Your objections are overruled.
And I do have a continuing objection on those
Yes, sir.
grounds. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Jensen, thank you. Is this an email to,
If you spill water on that piece of equipment, you will have to answer to the county supervisors of Walworth County.
I'll put it very far
I
away.
was already warned about that.
Is this an email from, or to tjones27555@aol.com, KRONJ@aol.com, Cindy Schroer, Kelly Labonte, and Don Godomsky from Tom Jones, dated October 15th, 1998?
Yes.
And was Mr. Jones forwarding you some funny quotes?
That's what it looks like.
And you forward that email to Mr. Jensen?
Yes.
And you write, Dan Quayle was either a bad comedian or a real idiot. The last story is my favorite. I'm not sure why. Multiple exclamation points, ideal why.
Yes.
And by the last story, were you referring to this? The man thinks for a moment and said, a man is driving home late one afternoon and he is driving above the speed limit. He notices a police car with its red lights on in his rearview mirror. He thinks, quote, I can outrun this guy, close quote. So he floors it and the race is on. The cars are racing down the highway 60, 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. Finally, as his speedometer passes 100, the guy figures what the hell and gives up. He pulls over to the curb. The police officer gets out of his cruiser and approaches the car. He leans down and says, quote, listen, mister, I've had a really lousy day and I just want to go home. Give me a good excuse and I will let you go, close quote. The man thinks for a moment and says, quote, 3 weeks ago, my wife ran off with a police officer. When I saw your cruiser in my rearview mirror, I thought you were that officer and you were trying to give her back, close quote. That's what you were referring to?
I assume so, yes.
Okay. And then Mr. Jensen writes, hey, want to run off somewhere? IDLY, correct?
Yes.
And you reply, what sparked this bold attempt at messing with me? Sounds wonderful. Where should we go? Correct?
Yes.
And he replies, really bold attempt, question mark? If it was really bold, you'd have tickets for the WinStar in your hand. Doesn't take much to spark anything when it comes to you. What was that word again? Keep forgetting. You name it. You have the number. Let me know. With an X at the end. You see that, Mrs. Jensen?
Yes.
And that was his response?
Yes.
And by the WinStar, is he referring to a cruise line?
Yes.
And when he says, you have the number, let me know, what is he referring to?
I don't know.
Well, is he referring to the fact that you have his phone number and you can call him if you really want to go on this trip with him?
I don't know if that's what he's referring to.
And then you reply, tickets in my hand, huh? What's a good time of year to go on one of these fabulous trips? Correct?
Yes.
And he replies, "Yup, with you any time of the year, but generally February through April when it's 0 here and 80 there." That's his response?
Yes.
And he's telling you that February through April is a good time of year to go on a Windstar cruise?
Yes.
And you reply, "What's it like in October," correct?
Yes.
And he replies, "Don't know, would be fun to find out," right?
Yes.
And then you reply, "Considering you have a milestone birthday next year, and we would both need some time to, quote, clean up, close quote, our lives, so to speak, I was thinking what a lovely way to spend your birthday. You, me, sunsets, ocean, champagne, and no, quote, outside, close quote, issues." That's your response?
Yes.
And when is Mr. Jensen's birthday?
October
October what?
5th.
And in October of 1998, had he turned 39?
Yes.
So the milestone birthday you're referring to is his 40th birthday, the next October?
Yes.
And by cleaning up our lives, so to speak, you mean getting rid of each other's spouses?
Yes.
And by outside issues, again, you're referring to the fact that you're married and he's married and has 2 children?
Yes.
And he replies, "That would be a dream come true. Which trip, when should I make the deposit?" That was his response?
Yes.
And did you understand that to mean that would be a dream come true?
Yes.
And he's offering to make a deposit on a cruise?
Jokingly, yes.
Well, it doesn't say jokingly in the email, does it?
Well, that's how I took it.
Okay. And you reply, the commitment part. Well. And he replies, "You have a problem with commitments? That's okay. Could probably find someone else to go if you changed your mind." That's his response?
Yes.
And he replies, or you reply, "Such as?" And he replies, "Kodak, he's my buddy. He would probably go. Don't know if they accept animals, though, or kids. Guess I'm screwed. Doug B, exclamation point. Wouldn't be the same, but we'd raise all kinds of hell." That's his response?
Yes.
And who's Doug B?
Doug B. Is a friend of his, Doug Brandt.
And had you met Mr. Brandt at this time?
No.
And Kodak is the dog?
Yes.
And he calls him my buddy?
I guess so, yes.
And this plan to go on a cruise, Mr. Jensen wasn't planning on taking his kids, was he?
No.
And he certainly wasn't planning on taking his wife, was he?
No.
And then you reply, "It's good to know I'm so easily replaced," correct?
Correct.
And you say, or excuse me, he says, "Ooh, didn't say you could be easily replaced. Couldn't be replaced, wouldn't be the same, and I'd be screwed, parent or not, as the case may be." Close parent, correct?
Yes.
And then you reply, "So let's say I have until the end of the year to decide one way or the other. And then in January, you can send in the deposit if I'm still in. Deal?" That's your response?
Yes.
And you're setting a deadline for January to make a decision as to whether you'll stay with your spouse?
Yes.
And you're setting January as a time for him to decide whether he'll stay with his wife?
No, if he wanted to take the trip while he was still with his wife, I don't think I made that differentiation.
Well, did you discuss how you would take a cruise in January if he was still married to Mrs. Jensen?
No, we didn't talk about the details. It was for fun.
But you did go on a cruise with Mr. Jensen after January of 1999, didn't you?
No?
You didn't go on a cruise with Mr. Jensen and Douglas and David Jensen?
No?
You didn't go on a cruise to a Disney cruise?
No, we did not go on a cruise.
And then he replies, fair enough, but no deadline on deciding. Whatever time it needs to be figured out, correct?
Correct.
And you say, and do you have it all figured out? Correct?
Correct.
And he says, I'm thinking so. Barring seeing a bunch of disgusting habits I couldn't live with, but then you'd have a hard time topping the boys with all I've taught them. And if it just keeps getting better, some details to be worked on, but then those are just the details, not the big issue. That's his response?
Yes.
And so in this email, he's talking about barring seeing a bunch of your disgusting habits,
That's what it looks like, yes.
and he's talking about living with you, correct?
I guess so, yes.
And then he talks about you having a hard time topping the boys with all that you've taught, with all that he's taught them, correct?
Correct.
So he's anticipating that if the details are worked on, you could be with him and the two boys, correct?
Objection, lady.
Overruled.
No, it reads to me like he's trying to say my disgusting habits can't be any worse than theirs.
And then the details that needs to be worked on relate to what he's going to do with his wife, Mrs. Jensen, Julie Jensen.
I have no idea what details he was referring to.
He never told you
Specifically.
how he would take care of Mrs. Jensen, did he? Mrs. Julie Jensen?
No.
And then you reply, it was the details I was wondering about. Disgusting habits, huh? Correct?
Yes.
So you're asking him what details he needs to work on so that you and he can go on this trip together?
I just mentioned I was wondering about him, I think. I don't know that I asked about him.
Well, when you mention them, what I'm asking you, did the subject matter relate to how he would be able to go on a trip while still married?
Yes.
And how he could take care of the fact that his wife was still in the picture, correct?
Yes.
And then he replies, Murphy spins on details. Details are just noise in the bigger picture. And yup, disgusting, correct?
Yes.
And you reply, and you plan on dealing with the details how? What kind of disgusting, correct?
Yes.
And he replies, one at a time, correct?
Yes.
And you reply, evasive little shit. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you're asking him in this email exchange how he plans on getting rid of his wife, and he won't give you an answer, will he?
Characterization. It's what it says is dealing with the details.
Well, he's in this email exchange. He's referring to how to deal with the issue that he's currently married, correct? To someone else?
I don't know if it's that or just the details of going on the trip, but yes, that would be part of it, yes.
And you're asking him how he plans on dealing with the fact that he's still married, and he won't give you an answer.
Objection, characterization. It says dealing with the details.
Well, overruled.
Okay, I'm sorry, what was that?
Can you read it back, please?
And you're asking him how he plans on dealing with the fact that he's still married and he won't give you an answer?
Correct. Yes.
And he replies, oh, she went to lunch and came back nasty, not trying to be evasive. What exactly are you looking for? We can talk about the details. Smile, you're cute when you smile, and other things, correct?
Yes.
And then you reply, I didn't come back nasty, I'm usually like this. Okay, we'll discuss the details. I'm cute when I smile, not trying to suck up, are you? Correct?
Yes.
And he replies, okay, you're cute when you try to burp. Correct?
Yes.
And then you reply, nice way to avoid the subject. You're worse than me. You see, is that his reply to you or your reply to him?
Yes.
So again, you're commenting on the fact that he's avoiding the subject as to what he'll do with the fact that he's still married to Mrs. Julie Jensen?
Yes.
And he replies, okay, ask me about a detail. I'm not avoiding. You're not asking. I'm supposed to guess the question. Okay, I'll be Karnak. That's his response to you?
Yes.
But he never told you about how he would take care of the details, did he?
Not at that point, no.
And then you reply, you asked me if I wanted to run off with you somewhere. I'd love to, but there are issues we have to deal with. I'm not sure how I'll deal with my issue, parent, thus the deadlines and agreements for any backing out that might be necessary, close parent. Do you know how you'll deal with your issues? Parent, details, whatever, close parent. Correct?
Yes.
And he replies, are deadlines and agreements necessary? Not trying to pin anything down. And I got my ticket punched, had that conversation, heard the answers. We're just hanging out for the lack of one of us making a decision. Just need to decide what to do and make an announcement. Correct?
Yes.
And you reply, okay. Deadlines and agreements are necessary because I don't want to let you down. Correct?
Yes.
And he replies, why? And you reply, IDL, why? Correct?
Yes.
So when he asks you why you don't want to let him down, you reply, because I love you.
Yes.
And he replies, IDLY too.
Yes.
And you reply, I know, thank you. Correct?
Yes.
And then he replies, don't forget. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, Mrs. Jensen, were you aware that then after this email, on the evening of Friday, October 16th, 1998, Mr. Jensen was looking up ways to kill his wife on the internet?
The objection is sustained.
Mrs. Jensen, were you aware that after this email on October 16th, 1998?
It's going to be improper again.
I don't know. I'm not seer.
Were you aware that after this email exchange on October 16th, 1998, Mr. Jensen was looking up botulism and pipe bombs?
It's improper, she knew.
I think you need to rephrase the question in a way that is more open to the witness.
Mrs. Jensen, were you aware if Mr. Jensen was looking up,
Whether.
I said if or whether, he was looking up botulism and poisoning and pipe bombs on the very same night that you set January as a deadline for getting rid of your issues or taking care of your issues?
I don't believe he did that, but no.
Were you aware, I asked you?
No.
And you don't believe he did that because you've only heard Mr. Jensen's side of the story?
Objection is sustained.
This is State's Exhibit 65. It is dated October 19th, 1998. And this appears to be, well, this is an email from you to Mark Jensen saying thanks, dated October 19th at 1998, correct? Mm-hmm. And do you know what you were thanking him for?
No.
Yeah, it's not on center.
I'm sorry, what?
It's not on center. Oh, maybe it is.
The remainder of that email, I don't think was read.
What do you know?
The last one I read.
I think I did. See, it's where mine ends. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I'm sorry, Ms. Jensen, I'm going to refer you back to State's Exhibit 160, where you're talking about these deadlines and agreements. And you respond to Mr. Jensen, never, in relation to you forgetting that he loves you, correct?
I'm not following you. Where are we?
Okay. Do you see to Kelly Labonte?
Yes,
And it says, don't forget.
yes.
And then you reply, never.
Okay, yes.
Okay? And then he replies, let me down how? And is your response by getting our hopes up and then backing out? Is that correct?
Yes,
And then he replies, either way, it'll be an always thing. You have to do what's right for you. I'll just be hanging out. Do you realize that you never use the word now, even in the past ES? That's his response?
yes.
Now, Mrs. Jensen, does it appear from your memory of this email that your talks of getting together were getting more serious now?
Yes,
And that was conveyed to Mr. Jensen?
yes.
And then you reply, what would change if I did? And I really haven't had a need for it now, have I? And he replies, I saw it. Aw, shit. Did you say, quote, when I say, double quote, now? Does reading count? Was that his response?
Yes.
And what is he referring to?
I think now was used as a word to use if I was ever ready to get together or meet or something like that. I don't remember exactly.
And then you reply, wondered if you'd catch it. Very good, but you haven't answered my question. Correct?
Yes,
And he replies, what would change? Some things, still respectful of messing with your deal. Rather than thinking about all the fun stuff, start planning the fun stuff. Wouldn't be letting 3 or 4 or 6 weeks go by. Hasn't been a problem lately, though. That's his response?
yes,
And so he's indicating he's still respectful of your marriage with Mr. Greenman?
yes.
He does not mention anything about his marriage with Mrs. Julie Jensen?
No, not at this time, it looks like.
And then when he says wouldn't be letting 3 or 4 or 6 weeks go by, hasn't been a problem lately, though, he's referring to the fact that you've been seeing each other fairly regularly.
Yeah, I guess so.
State's Exhibit 65. Monday, October 19th, 1998. An email from you to Mark Jensen saying, where the subject is thanks. Correct?
Yes,
And then Mr. Jensen replies, a weekend, you got it. Trust, that's the big one. Give you a call soon. How's Dawn? IDLY. Correct?
yes.
And Mrs. Jensen, do you recall whether there was more to your original email to Mr. Jensen on October 19th, 1998 than is reflected in this exhibit?
I don't remember.
Okay. And who's Dawn?
She was another woman that I worked with.
And what's her full name?
Dawn Cooper?
And was she also a friend of yours?
Yes,
A close friend?
Yeah, at the time, yes.
at the time? States Exhibit 66, dated October 20th, 1998. And this is an email from you to Mark Jensen dated Tuesday, October 20th, where the subject is good morning, where you write, "So, how are you this lovely Tuesday? Me, I'm okay. Last night was quiet. He came home trying to act like nothing had happened. Didn't bring it up and was all smiles and friendliness. Paren, but not too friendly, if you get my meaning," close paren. "I wasn't very talkative and he noticed it, so kept his distance. Don't know what he's thinking, and since he won't talk to me, I guess I can only imagine. Pity, I don't seem to care much anymore. 6 years, I really thought I had it in me to love and accept him as is forever. Didn't realize just how selfish he was. Maybe it's me a little bit now. I finally seen the light kind of thing. I had hope, lots of hope, that things would go back to the way they can be when he decides to be a loving individual. The hope's gone. A part of me has slowly been fading away these last few months, and this weekend just completely killed it, I think. I don't care if he never touches me again. Hell, I'd prefer it. And I don't really enjoy his company much anymore either. I'd rather be left alone to do, quote, my thing, close quote, than have him around. It doesn't even bother me when he's late getting home. A year ago, it was a major point of contention between us. I was always harping on him about that. Now, the later he is, the more time I have to myself, and that's just fine with me. Numb, 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 weird. Looking forward to Friday. Smiling and laughing will be good for me. Some time off from the tension, eh? Talk to you soon, IDLY." That was your email to him?
Yes.
And in this email, are you referring to your husband, Mark Greenman?
Yes.
And in this email, well, then Mr. Jensen responds to your email saying, "Hey there, maybe it's me a little bit now. I finally seen the light kind of thing." Smiley face. In relation to quote this, close quote, late getting home, where is he? I'll give you a call pretty quick. Cheers and IDLY. That's his response?
Yes.
And he's referring to fragments or sections of your email below?
Yes.
And at this time, although your email started out from Kelly Labonte, it's being sent to Kelly Greenman. Can you see that?
Yes.
States Exhibit 67. Dated October 20th, 1998. Ms. Jensen, does this appear to be a continuation of the email that we just read, where you talk about your husband the night before?
So far, it looks just like the same thing, not a continuation.
Okay. And then Mr. Jensen replies that he'll give you a call. And then you reply, "He's just pokey. He's never gone long enough to make me really question where he's been. What would, quote, this be, close quote," correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Jensen replies, "Something special. Could be everything. It is what we make it. Could go on and on. Be or not to be thing. What would this be? Cheers." That's his response?
I can't see it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, that's his response.
And he's indicating that his relationship with you and you with him could be something special?
Yes.
And that it could be everything?
Yes, I guess.
And that your relationship could go on and on?
Yes.
And then you reply, this is special, but I was talking about seeing the light with my husband and myself. That was your response?
Yes.
And then he responds, just notice that you're still Labonte. Oops, N-G-R-I-E. I get it from Labonte and it goes to Gree. Get your point. Was that his response?
Yes.
And so he's noticing that, is he noticing that after a month of being married to Mr. Greenman, emails to you are now addressed Kelly Greenman?
Yes.
But that when you send an email to him, it's still Kelly Labonte?
Yes.
And then you reply, they just talked to me about it. They were going to keep the outside able to reach me with Labonte K, and I told them no. They did tell they could block harassing emails, but since he's changed his address 3 times already between these 2 attempts, all he's left with now is calling me at work. If that starts, then maybe I'll change my extension or move to a new town and get another job. Any ideas where I should go? That's your response?
Yes.
And he replies, yeah, yeah. Is that his response, Ms. Jensen?
Yes.
And you reply, well, and he replies, 2 ideas, small Midwestern towns, and they don't include Denver. Was that his response to you?
Yes.
And you reply, how about Joplin, Missouri? Was that your response?
Yes.
And he replies, been there at 4 a.m., not much there. Nope. And then you reply, Springfield, Illinois. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then he replies, nope. How about KEN/RAC, correct?
Yes.
And he's referring to Kenosha, Racine?
Yes.
And he worked in Racine and lived in Kenosha at that time?
Yes.
And you reply, never heard of it, ha ha, correct?
Yes.
See, and then he replies, see, no one would ever find you, correct?
Yes.
And you say, good point, hope you could though. And he replies, wouldn't be a problem even in the dark. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then he replies, you make me smile, big, are you really so sweet? And you reply, you make me smile, big, are you really so sweet, correct?
Yes.
And then he replies, what you see is what you get. I'm not sure, but thinking you do know the answer to that, and it's probably not. Cheers. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you reply, salty, perhaps? Was that your response?
Yes.
And what are you talking about there?
It's a sexual connotation.
And then he replies, IDLY, correct?
Yes.
And you reply, me too? You reply, me too, Mrs. Jensen?
Can you move it down?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
And then he replies, so the Appleton furniture is in St. Louis, walls are being moved in Brookfield, maybe explains why he's in a bad mood. Cheers. And you reply, maybe. I love getting emails from you. Makes my moment. If Joyce doesn't call me back soon with some answers, everyone at Blueprint may not get to eat. Was that your response?
Yes.
And at that time, were you part of the group that was planning the Blueprint Conference in St. Louis?
Yes.
And that was to occur in November?
Yes.
Do you recall if it was the first weekend in November?
I don't recall.
Okay. And then he replies, and I may not be able to either. Correct?
Yes,
And is that again a sexual connotation?
yes,
And you reply, don't go there?
yes,
And he replies, I know, but want to. Correct?
yes,
And you reply, me too, talking to the old man. That's your response?
yes,
And are you referring to the fact that you're talking to your husband at the time that you're having this email exchange?
yes,
And he replies, is he being nice? Excuse me, Mr. Jensen replies, is he being nice? And you reply, yeah, he's trying. Things are so awkward now. I don't have anything to say and he can tell. He calls to be nice and I'm so much for being nice. Is that the exchange?
yes,
And he, Mr. Jensen replies, at least you have him trying to be nice, correct?
Move it down.
Oh, I'm sorry.
yes,
States Exhibit 68, dated October 20th, 1998. Ms. Jensen, this is an email from you to Mark Jensen entitled Subject Short Blue Cocktail Dresses. And do you say, maybe I'll bring the green one too and you can decide which one I wear?
yes,
And he replies, how could I possibly decide that? Okay, wear both. Would the green one be the one that he said makes you look like a working girl? Was that his response?
yes,
And by he, is he referring to your husband, Mr. Greenman?
yes,
And then you reply, yep, maybe I'll have them sent to you at the hotel for Thursday delivery just to give you some time to mull it over. I could also include the white one, correct?
yes,
And at this point, are you referring to your planned trip to Chicago?
yes,
And Mr. Jensen replies, laughing, would they be smelling like obsession? Oh my God, and a white one too? Was that his response?
yes,
And then you reply, of course, if I'm going to play dirty, I'll have to go all the way now, won't I? Correct?
yes,
And he replies, why hold back? Was that his response?
yes,
And you reply, had a lunch class today, very informative, wasn't trying to hold back. And Mr. Jensen replies, class on what? Is that correct?
yes,
And you reply, estate planning? And he replies, Mr. Jensen replies, yawn. Thought perhaps short blue cocktail dresses, but then you're probably better suited to teaching the course. Was that his response to you?
yes,
And when he says you're probably better suited to teaching the course, is he referring to estate planning or something else?
something else,
Something sexual?
probably yes,
And you reply, it wasn't a yawn, it was very interesting, correct?
yes,
And he replies, okay. And you reply, what do you mean, okay? Is that correct?
yes,
And he replies, you must need a little stimulation if that's interesting, correct?
yes,
States Exhibit 70, Sunday, October 25th, 1998. This is an email from Mr. Jensen to you entitled Question, dated Sunday, October 25th, 1998 at 5:31 p.m. And he says, so, I have this question, remember? Don't tell me what I want, in quotes. So what do you really think? Was that his email to you on Sunday, October 25th at 5:31 p.m.?
yes,
And you reply, what do I think about what? Correct?
Yes,
And you're replying the next day, Monday, October 26, 1998,
yes,
which would be a work day.
yes.
And then he replies, remember what, quote, don't tell me, close quote, was in relation to? Just wondering if you had given that any more thought, if it would be an issue, if you'd be okay with it, if whatever. Thought I'd toss it up in the air and see what came back down. Wasn't that the crush conversation in Columbus? That was at a time when I wasn't at this point with, quote, this, close quote. Was that his email to you?
Yes,
And did you have a conversation in Columbus, Ohio?
I was in Columbus. It was a phone conversation.
Okay. And why does he call it the crush conversation?
I'm not sure. I don't recall.
And you reply, I think it would be a piece of cake and a joy taking on all three of you. Correct?
Yes,
And are you referring to the fact that it would be a piece of cake and a joy taking on Mark, Douglas, and David Jensen?
yes.
And Mrs. Jensen is not considered in this conversation?
I'm sorry?
Mrs. Julie Jensen is not considered in this conversation?
No.
And then he sends you an email, October 26, 1998, which would be that same Monday at 11:11 p.m., where he says, we kind of got off on a tangent there, so wanted to come back to this. I like that answer. Taking on could be the appropriate verbiage, IDLY. That was his response to you?
I can't see the last part, but yes.
How's that?
That's better, thank you.
And does that email exchange relate to a conversation where at the beginning of your relationship, he wondered if you would be ready or willing to take on a man with 2 children?
I think the comment he said was you wouldn't want a man with 2 children, and I said, don't tell me what I want.
But that was at a time when you wasn't at this point with this. Do you know what he's referring to there?
I'm sorry, where is that?
You see that right there?
No. I don't know exactly what that means.
But the this in quotation marks refers to your relationship with Mr. Jensen, correct?
Yes.
The next exhibit is State 71, dated Monday, October 26, 1998, 1:09 p.m. Mr. Jensen sends you an email saying, going out to run out and get some lunch. FYI, I sent the change, paren, dollar symbol, close paren, for the phone down. Thought I'd let you know for your, underlined your, budget purposes. Don't want to be helping him, but know you're taking care of yourself. So in that regard, just part of the deal with this. That was his email to you?
Yes.
And when he says he sent the change or the money for the phone down, Was he assisting you in purchasing a cell phone?
Not purchasing, just paying the phone bill, the cell phone bill.
The cell phone bill? And why would he do that?
Because we talked a lot on my cell phone, and back then they didn't have the deals they have now, so it was a pretty substantial monthly bill.
Did you have Sprint service at that time?
I don't remember what service it was.
Do you recall whether Mr. Jensen had Sprint service on his cell phone?
No, I don't know.
And then you replied, didn't know we made deals with, quote, this, close quote, smiley face. You're too good sometimes. How did this happen and why to me? Is that your response?
Yes.
And he replies, we didn't. Guess it's my deal with this, like opening a door for a GF. How and why? I was just sitting there, and there she was, and the more I talked to her, the better it got. That was his response to you?
Yes.
And by GF, does he mean girlfriend?
Yes.
And by the just sitting there, there she was, the more I talked to her, the better it got, is he referring to you?
Yes.
And he's referring to you as his girlfriend?
Yes.
And you reply, you're too much, enjoy lunch, correct?
Yes.
States Exhibit 69. Begins Sunday, October 25th, 1998 at 5:31 p.m. Mrs. Jensen, this begins with an email from Mark Jensen to you where he says, so I have this question. Remember, don't tell me what I want, so what do you really think? Is that the same email or the start of the same email that we just read from Monday, October 26, 1998 at 11:11 p.m.?
This is one we've gone over, yes.
Where you say, I think it would be a piece of cake and joy taking on all three of you?
Yes.
And this goes on with Mr. Jensen's response to that, where he says, that got me laughing. Piece of cake and a joy taking on all three. You know, I can see that. I think you'd be able to handle 3 or 4 as the case may be. Parent, got pics from Doug and Robin of the new edition, close parent. I think that you'd be good for them too. Was that his response to you?
Yes.
And who's Doug and Robin?
Friends of his.
Doug and Robin Brandt,
Yes.
who recently had a new baby?
Back then, yes.
And did you know Doug and Robin Brandt?
No.
Well, how does he know that you'll know who he's talking about?
I don't know.
Well, at the time that you received this email, did you know who he was talking about?
He might have told me about them before.
And then you replied, don't want to take on Doug, Robin, and baby too, correct?
Yes.
And he replies, cute. You may be sick, but you haven't lost that sense of humor. Don't worry, you won't have to. Although at times, Doug and I, well, you know how guys are, but we're generally self-sufficient, as in can get our own beer and stuff. Correct?
Yes.
And then you reply, rarely do I lose the sense of humor. Feeling funky today with the throat thing. Don't want to talk to anyone. Takes too much effort. Yesterday was weird with Mark. Wish I could explain. Thinking it was mostly me not feeling well, so oversensitive to everything. Hopefully tonight will be better. On the one hand, he tried to be good and take care of me, but for the most part, he just irritated me and I took care of myself. He's suddenly doing that, quote, do you know how much I love you, close quote crap. I just want to punch him in the nose when he says that. Real romantic of me, huh? Was that his response to you? Or excuse me, your response to him?
Yes.
And what do you mean by the funky?
My husband and I had a funky relationship. It was on again, off again for a long time.
But But at the time of this email, you were wondering if maybe it was just you feeling that way?
Yeah, I guess so.
And that you were maybe perceiving things oversensitively?
Yes.
And your husband was trying to be good and take care of you?
Yes.
But that just irritated you?
Yes.
And then Mr. Jensen responds to that with, yesterday was weird too, other than the obvious reasons. I guess that a part of it has to do with coming off a great time and still wanting to be there and comparing that to funky. I don't have a great tolerance for funky. Know how I want it to be with your deal. Would guess that he knows he got himself in trouble, which is the reason for the I love you stuff. But you are taking it as shallow because of the lack of consistency, the funky, being in second place, etc. Make any sense? On a lighter note, I told you you were sweet, and I started getting this stiff neck Saturday, and by Sunday it was really sore. Still is. Every time I move and it hurts, I smile. Weird. That's his response?
Yes.
And he's talking about the fact that he doesn't have a great tolerance for funky?
That's what it sounds like, yes.
And he seems to have information that your husband knows he got himself in trouble, which is the reason for the I love you stuff.
Yes.
Was your husband having an affair at the time?
Not to my knowledge.
And when Mr. Jensen talks about his stiff neck Saturday and by Sunday it was really sore, still is. Every time I move and it hurts, I smile. So you're referring to the fact that you had sexual contact or oral sex the weekend before or the days before?
Yes, that's what it looks like.
And that would have been in your trip to Chicago?
Yes.
And then you reply, maybe I'm just being weird, but it's not so much shallow as it is that it frightens me, almost as though the question is some sort of threat. Does that make any sense? As though I love you so much. Don't even think about leaving because it'll never happen kind of thing. I know it's mostly me, but the vibes are really bad when I'm around him these days. Sorry to hear your neck is sore, but at least the memories are good. Multiple exclamation points and then your symbol for cunnilingus?
Yes.
Or, okay. Or oral sex?
Yes.
And at this time, what you're describing in this email, is it that you're not really sure what's going on with your husband?
Correct.
And you're not really sure what his intentions are?
Those are my feelings, yes, I believe, at the time.
And how long had you known your husband at the time that you married him?
About 6 years, I believe.
And at this point, okay. So as of the date of this email, October 26, 1998, it was, what, a little bit more than 6 years? Or just around 6 years?
I'm not sure exactly.
Okay. But you knew him about 6 years before you married him?
I think so.
Okay. And even though you knew him approximately 6 years before you married him, you're still having a hard time understanding what's going on inside your house and with your relationship?
What's the relevance of that to the case?
I believe it has relevance, but I won't do a speaking objection. Or I won't. I'll go on. I'll move on.
Go on. Well, better yet. Well, finish this training,
Okay.
trail, whatever they call it in the internet world, and then we'll break for the day.
Okay. And then you reply, I don't know, just really weird. Makes me most uncomfortable sometimes. Is that your response?
Yes.
Oh, I skipped a line, I'm sorry. He replies, that they are, with the symbol for oral sex. As to the rest, wow, a possession thing, huh? Is that correct?
Yes.
And does it appear to you that he's referring to the fact that your husband is being possessive?
I think that's what I alluded to, and he's
Responding to that?
responding to that, yes.
And then you reply, I don't know, just really weird, makes me most uncomfortable sometimes. And then he replies, almost as though the question is some sort of threat. Does that make any sense? Yeah, I think I know what you mean. A heed and obey, don't question kind of thing. The only real problem I'm having with the neck at this point is looking straight up. Wonder why that is. Guess I'll stop looking straight up. Besides, the memories then come to mind. I probably look kind of silly looking at the ceiling with my tongue hanging out of my mouth. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the first couple of lines, almost as though the question is some sort of threat. Does that make any sense? He's taking that from your email, correct?
Correct.
And he's indicating that he understands what you mean?
Yes.
He understands the heed and obey, don't question kind of relationship?
That's his interpretation of it, yes.
And he understands that.
Objection, asked and answered, reading.
Sustained.
And you reply, you're a bizarre one sometimes. Tongue hanging out, huh? And he replies, guess that is kind of bizarre. Oh well, wasn't actually doing that. Just this strange image came to mind. Okay, how about the other part of the response? And then you reply, what do you mean? Is that correct?
Yes.
And he replies, heed and obey. That was kind of the feeling, sense I got. Was wondering if that was on track as it goes with the personality thing. Kind of ambivalent to a point. Then when pressed, this, quote, if you know what's good for you, close quote, thing comes out. The next step is getting really hot about it. Correct?
Yes.
And you're still talking about your feelings regarding your husband's behavior in October of 1998?
Well, he's talking about them right now, yes.
Okay. And you reply, he's never been like this before that I can recall, so I don't know what the real motivation is. It's like he's become wicked insecure and oversensitive about everything. And if I don't act a certain way, he kind of lashes out of me. Not anything major, but small bursts of irritation. Make any sense? Was that your reply?
Yes.
And are you describing the fact that your husband is having small bursts of irritation and is insecure and seems to be oversensitive about things in your relationship at this time in October of 1998?
Yes.
And do you think that could be because he sensed you were having an affair with someone else?
Calls respectfully.
And then Mr. Jensen replies, yep, maybe it's that you're married to him now, still think it fits the profile, and maybe you're developing a lower tolerance for funky. Is that his response?
Yes.
And when he says still think it fits the profile, what is he talking about?
I'm not sure.
And you reply, maybe, what a pity, correct?
Yes.
And when you reply, maybe, what a pity, is that in relation to still think it fits the profile, or the fact that you're developing a lower tolerance for funky?
Probably the developing a lower tolerance for funky, but not sure.
And then Mr. Jensen replies, pity, which part? And you reply that I have to deal with this crap, correct?
Yes.
And by crap, you mean the developments or the state of your marriage at that time?
Yes.
Okay. I'll stop here.
All right, we'll stop for the day, and again, please don't read, watch, or listen to any media account of the trial. Don't discuss the case with anyone, not even amongst yourselves, and enjoy the evening. Any questions? 8:55.